She begged for work in rags, but the rich rancher asked, "Will you be the mother my girls need?" The dust of the road clung to her torn dress as she knelt in front of the iron gates, her hair tangled from the wind, her voice hoarse from pleading. She had not come for charity, nor for pity, only for the dignity of work. The ranch loomed behind the man before her, vast and guarded, the kind of land that belonged to people who never had to beg. Her trembling fingers clutched a basket, almost empty now, while her eyes lifted to the tall figure in the wide-brimmed hat. He looked down at her, his jaw set, his boots planted firmly in the dirt as though the ground itself belonged to him. At his side, two little girls peeked from behind his long coat, their dresses simple yet clean, their curious eyes studying the woman who dared kneel before their father. One of the girls stepped forward, a tiny hand clutching a wildflower, and without hesitation offered it to the stranger in rags. The woman's heart broke and healed all at once at the innocent gesture, though her lips could barely form words. The rancher bent, his leather jacket creaking with the movement, and with a tenderness that contradicted his hardened frame, he brushed his fingers against her dirt-streaked cheek. She flinched at first, unused to such gentleness, but then allowed her gaze to meet his. There was no scorn in his eyes, no dismissal, only a storm of conflict that mirrored her own. The need to protect, the ache of loneliness, the duty of survival. She found herself within the walls of his home, her hands trembling as she tried to tidy a kitchen that smelled faintly of wood smoke and memories. One of the girls lingered at her side, her small face tilted upward, searching her eyes with the unspoken question every child longs to ask, "Will you stay?" The woman's own eyes brimmed with uncertainty. She had known only abandonment, only hunger, yet in the fragile warmth of that moment, she saw what it meant to be needed. The days that followed were heavy with trial. The ranch was merciless, its winds unforgiving, its nights colder than she had ever endured. But beneath the vast sky, as she scrubbed, sewed, and soothed, something took root, a bond not born of blood, but of choice. The rancher watched her from a distance, his girls' laughter slowly returning, their little hands often tangled in her skirt as though afraid she might vanish with the dawn. And then came the storm. Clouds rolled over the plains like a warning, and before she could comprehend its force, she found herself caught between fear and faith. He came to her then, riding hard across the open land, his voice fierce with urgency as he gathered her into his arms. The world was chaos, hoofs pounding, thunder echoing, wine tearing at their clothes, but in the shelter of his embrace, there was calm. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, let herself believe. When he spoke, his words carved themselves into her very soul. "You came here asking for work," he whispered against her hair. "But my girls don't need a servant. They need a mother. Will you be the one?" Her breath faltered, her heart torn between disbelief and the quiet, rising certainty that everything in her life had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to these children. She had begged in rags, but what she had found was not mere labor, not mere shelter, it was belonging. And as the storm raged across the horizon, she gave her answer, not in words, but in the steady way she leaned into him, finally unafraid to be held. Her breath faltered, her heart torn between disbelief and the quiet, rising certainty that everything in her life had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to these children. She had begged in rags, but what she had found was not mere labor, not mere shelter, it was belonging. And as the storm raged across the horizon, she gave her answer, not in words, but in the steady way she leaned into him, finally unafraid to be held. The rancher's arms tightened around her, as though her silence told him more than any vow ever could. For years he had lived with the weight of loss, his wife buried beneath the cottonwoods at the edge of the property, his nights haunted by the echo of children's cries when no mother came to soothe them. Now, in this woman's trembling presence, he felt something shift. He felt the ache ease, not entirely, but enough to let in light. The storm broke hard that night, lashing rain across the plains, hammering the shutters of the house. She worked without rest, calming the frightened girls, singing softly though her voice wavered, mending leaks with her own skirts pressed against the cracks. He watched her move with determination, ragged though she was, her hair plastered to her face with rain, her hands raw from labor. She did not cower in the corner. She did not give in to despair. She fought, and she stayed, and in her endurance he saw the strength his daughters had been starving for. When dawn came, the land lay drenched and scarred, the pastures slick with mud, the fences broken in places where the wind had torn them down. He rode out to survey the damage, leaving her with the girls, and as he crossed the sodden fields, he realized he could not imagine the house without her inside it. That thought unsettled him more than the broken fences or the drowned crops. Inside, the children clung to her skirt, their little faces streaked with tears and dirt, their eyes wide with the trust children rarely gave so quickly. She knelt to them, cupping their cheeks, her voice steady though her body trembled from exhaustion. "You are safe," she whispered. "I won't leave you." And when they finally slept, tangled together on the cot, she sat beside them and allowed her tears to fall. Tears of relief, of fear, of something dangerously close to hope. The days stretched into weeks. She mended what she could, learned to bake bread in his kitchen though the flour was scarce, tended to the garden with bare hands. The girls followed her everywhere, shadows of innocence reborn, their laughter echoing through the ranch like a song long forgotten. The rancher, his name was Elias, watched from a distance at first, careful, guarded. He was a man used to control, to order, to carrying burdens alone. But her presence softened edges he thought had been carved in stone. One evening, he found her on the porch, sewing by lamplight, her fingers pricked and bleeding. He crouched before her, taking her hand without asking, his thumb brushing over the tiny wounds. "You don't have to bleed to prove yourself useful here," he said, his voice low. She looked at him, startled by the gentleness in his tone. "I'm not trying to prove myself," she whispered. "I'm trying to stay." Her honesty struck him harder than any storm. He wanted to tell her she already belonged, that the moment his daughters had placed their small hands in hers, she had woven herself into the fabric of their lives. But the words lodged in his throat, heavy with fear. He had lost once. Could he risk it again? Her past lingered around her like a shadow. Neighbors began to whisper when they came to trade at the ranch. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had Elias taken in a woman in rags with no name, no family, no proof of who she was? She heard the whispers too, carried on the wind when she walked into town, felt the stares of women whose hands were adorned with rings and whose children wore shoes without holes. Shame gnawed at her, old shame she thought she had buried. She did not tell Elias, but at night, when the house was quiet, she folded her hands together and prayed silently that her past would not follow her here. But the past has a way of finding those who run from it. It was late autumn when the first rider came, a man with a scar across his cheek and eyes sharp as broken glass. He arrived at dusk, demanding to see Elias. She stood at the door with the girls behind her, her heart hammering against her ribs. When Elias stepped forward, the man smirked, his gaze flicking to her like a knife. "You've taken in strays, I see," he said. "But this one's not yours to keep." Her knees went weak, the air sucked from her lungs. Elias placed himself between her and the man, his stance solid, his voice like steel. "Whatever claim you think you have, it ends here." But the man only laughed. "We'll see." He rode off, leaving dust and dread in his wake. That night, she told Elias everything. How she had fled from a cruel hand, how she had nothing but scars and shame behind her, how she had begged not for charity but for a chance to survive free. He listened, his face unreadable, his hand resting on hers as though to anchor her trembling words. When she finished, she waited for rejection, for anger, for the command to leave. Instead, he only said, "You are not what he says you are. You are what you choose to be now. And my girls, they need you." But threats grew thicker than the prairie grass. The scarred man returned with others, circling the ranch, watching from a distance, leaving signs that spoke of violence to come. Elias began to prepare, repairing fences with more than wood, teaching the woman how to load a rifle though her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it steady. "I don't want to fight," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I just want to live." He placed his hand over hers, steadying her aim. "Then fight to live, for them." His glance flicked to the girls playing in the dirt nearby, their laughter carrying across the yard like fragile bells. The day came when the storm of men descended. Hoofs thundered, voices shouted, the air thick with the smell of dust and sweat. Elias rode out first, his coat whipping behind him, his voice commanding as he shouted for them to turn back. She stood at the gate with the rifle clutched to her chest, her heart hammering so loud she thought it might shatter her ribs. The girls huddled behind her, clutching her skirt, their wide eyes locked on her face. She wanted to weep, to run, but she did neither. She stood. Gunfire cracked the air, sharp as lightning. Horses screamed, men shouted, the land itself seemed to quake. She did not remember pulling the trigger, only the weight of the rifle kicking against her shoulder, the scream torn from her throat as she fought to protect what had become hers. And then it was over. Smoke drifted. The scarred man lay on the ground, the rest scattered like wolves denied their prey. Elias returned to her, his chest heaving, his face streaked with blood and dirt, his eyes searching hers. She dropped the rifle, her knees giving way, but he caught her before she fell. "It's done," he murmured. "You're safe. They're safe." The girls clung to her, their sobs muffled against her dress, and for the first time, she did not feel like an intruder in their lives. She felt like the anchor they reached for, the one who had not run, the one who had chosen to stay. In the weeks that followed, the ranch found peace again. Those scars remained, in the broken boards of the fence, in the bruises along Elias's arms, in the nightmares that woke her gasping in the dark. But healing grew slowly, like grass after fire. The girls began to call her mama without hesitation, the word falling from their lips as naturally as breath. Elias, though still, guarded, allowed his hand to brush against hers when they passed in the hall, allowed his gaze to linger longer, softer. Winter came, fierce and unyielding. They worked together to keep the house warm, to keep the livestock alive, to keep hope burning against the cold. One night, as snow fell silent against the windows, Elias spoke what had long lingered in his silence. "You asked for work," he said, his voice low, his hand resting over hers on the table. "But I don't want your labor. I want your life beside mine. I want you, not as a servant, not as a guest, but as the mother my girls already believe you to be, and as the woman he faltered, his eyes dark with something deeper than words. "As the woman I cannot lose." Her tears fell freely, not of fear this time, but of the answer she had carried in her heart since the first day she stepped onto his land. She placed her hand over his, steady and sure. "Then you will not lose me." And so she stayed, not as a beggar in rags, but as the heart of a family rebuilt from ashes. She became the rhythm of the ranch, the warmth of the hearth, the voice that soothed the nightmares, the strength that stood against storms. The woman who had once begged for work became the mother two little girls needed, and the partner a lonely man had longed for, though he had never dared to hope again. Their story did not end with that storm, nor with that winter. Life continued, hard and beautiful, full of trials that tested them and joys that mended them. But through it all, she never again wondered if she belonged. She did. She always had, from the moment a little girl's hand had offered her a flower at the gates of the ranch. The snow did not stop for days. It fell heavy across the plains, blanketing the land in silence, muffling the world until even the sound of the wind seemed swallowed. Inside the ranch house, the fire never went out. She rose before dawn to stoke it, her hands red and raw from the cold, her hair tucked beneath the shawl Elias had insisted she wear. The girls would wake to the smell of cornbread or porridge, their laughter warming the kitchen more than the flames ever could. Elias worked tirelessly outside, breaking ice for the cattle, hauling wood, his coat and beard rimmed with frost when he returned. She met him at the door each time, her arms ready to take whatever burden he carried, her eyes silently asking if he was whole. And always, his gaze told her the same, he was whole because she was there. But beneath the warmth of their fragile peace, shadows lingered. Though the scarred man's body had been carried away and buried by the law, whispers reached them through the frozen winds. He had belonged to a larger band, men who thrived on violence, men who would not forgive his death lightly. The name McGraw was spoken in hushed tones at the trading post, and each time Elias heard it, his hand tightened unconsciously near the holster at his hip. She noticed, though he did not speak of it to her. She knew the storm of men was not yet over. One evening, while the snow fell in soft, relentless sheets, Elias sat by the fire, mending the strap of his rifle. She sat across from him, the girls asleep upstairs, the crackle of the flames between them. "You haven't told me all of it," she said quietly, her needle pausing in the half-mended hem of a dress. His eyes lifted to hers, steady, unreadable. "All of what?" She swallowed, her throat tight. "About them. About the men who might come." For a long time, He said nothing. The fire popped, the storm moaned against the windows. At last, he set the rifle down, his voice low and even. They were outlaws, men who take what they want and destroy what they can't. McGraw was only the meanest of them. Without him, they're scattered, but scattered wolves can be more dangerous than a pack. His eyes, dark as the winter sky, found hers. If they come, they'll come for me. But they may try to use you, or the girls. Her stomach nodded, but she forced herself not to look away. Then I'll stand with you. He leaned forward, his hand covering hers where it trembled in her lap. I don't expect you to fight my battles. She shook her head, her voice fierce despite the fear that clawed at her. You don't understand. They're my battles now too. This is my home. These are my girls. You are. Her voice caught, but the truth pressed forward like a tide. You are mine as much as I am yours. Whatever comes, I won't run. Something softened in his gaze then, something unspoken but deep, a trust that bound them closer than any vow. He drew her hand to his lips, his rough beard grazing her skin, his breath warm. Then we'll face it together. Winter dragged on, but the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. He taught her to ride properly, not just perched nervously on the saddle but with strength, with balance, with command. At first she faltered, falling hard into the snow, but each time he lifted her back up, steadying her with his hands on her waist, his voice low in her ear. By the end of the season, she could ride across the fields with her hair flying, the girls cheering as they watched from the fence. For the first time in years, she felt strong, not merely surviving but living. The thaw came slowly, turning snow to mud, mud to grass. The air filled with the smell of earth and the sound of birds returning. She planted seeds in the garden, the girls helping with clumsy hands, Elias building new fences where the old had rotted. Life breathed into the land again, and with spring came a day she would never forget. It was late afternoon, the sun sinking golden over the horizon, when Elias came to her in the barn. She was brushing down one of the horses, her sleeves rolled, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. He stood there a long moment, watching, his expression unreadable, until at last he stepped forward. There's something I've been meaning to ask, he said, his voice quieter than usual. She straightened, brushing stray strands of hair from her face, her heart suddenly quickening. What is it? He took her hand, rough and warm, his thumb tracing the calluses she had earned since coming here. The girls already call you their mother, and in truth, you've been that since the moment you first held them. But he faltered, then drew a breath. I want more than that. I want you to be my wife. The world seemed to still, the air thick with the weight of his words. She stared at him, her heart pounding, her mind struggling to believe. Elias, I don't offer riches or ease, he said firmly. This land is hard, and it will always be hard. But I offer you my name, my protection, my life beside yours, whatever it costs. His eyes locked onto hers, fierce with sincerity. Will you marry me? Her hands trembled, her throat tight with tears she couldn't hold back. She had once been a beggar, unwanted, unseen. Now she was being asked to be cherished, to be chosen. Slowly, with all the strength of her heart, she nodded. Yes. His breath left him in a rush, his arms wrapping around her, lifting her from the ground as though she weighed nothing. She laughed through her tears, her hands tangled in his coat, her lips finding his in a kiss that sealed the promise between them. The girls danced when they were told, clapping their hands and spinning in circles. A simple ceremony followed weeks later, with only a few neighbors present, and the vows were spoken beneath the wide sky. She wore a dress she had sewn herself, plain but touched with grace, and when Elias placed the ring on her finger, she felt as though the weight of every sorrow she had carried had lifted. She was no longer alone. Yet peace never lasts long on land such as this. Summer brought growth, but also danger. The McGraw gang, fractured but not gone, began to circle again. Signs appeared, fences cut, tracks near the stream, cattle missing. Elias tightened security, keeping his rifle close, teaching the girls to run to the cellar if danger came. She tried to hide her fear, but at night she lay awake, listening for the sound of hooves in the dark. It was during one of those tense nights that the attack came. A shout, a crash of glass, the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, Elias already grabbing his gun, his voice urgent, "Get the girls." She ran barefoot to their room, scooping them into her arms, their cries piercing the night. The house shook with the sound of boots, the crack of gunfire. She raced to the cellar, pushing the girls inside, her body shielding them. "Stay here, no matter what," she whispered, kissing their hair. She returned to the fight, though terror clawed at her. The barn was ablaze, flames lighting the sky, shadows of men moving across the yard. Elias stood in the doorway, firing with deadly precision, his figure illuminated by fire. She grabbed the spare rifle, her hands steady now, her fear transformed into fury. She fired, and a man fell, his shout cut short. Another turned toward her, but Elias was faster, his bullet striking true. The fight seemed endless, chaos and fire and the smell of blood. At last, the gang scattered, retreating into the night, leaving their dead behind. The flames consumed the barn, but the house stood, and so did they. Elias lowered his rifle, his chest heaving, his eyes searching for her. When he saw her still standing, smoke-streaked and trembling but alive, he crossed the distance in 2 strides, pulling her against him. "You're safe," he murmured, though his own hands shook. "You're safe." But she knew safety was fragile. They had won the battle, but the war was not done. The McGraws would return, stronger, angrier. And yet, as she held Elias and felt the girls clutching her skirts when they emerged from the cellar, she knew she would never again face life as a beggar, never again run from fear. She was a wife now, a mother, a fighter. Whatever storms came, she would meet them at his side. The months that followed were marked by rebuilding. The barn was gone, but neighbors came to help raise a new one, their respect for Elias, and for her, deepened by the stand they had taken. The girls grew taller, their hair sunlit as they ran through the fields, their laughter proof that joy could survive even in the shadow of danger. She worked harder than ever, her hands calloused, her face lined with both exhaustion and contentment. Each night, when Elias drew her into his arms, she felt the steady beat of his heart against hers and knew she had found the place where she belonged. But the thread never vanished. It lingered, like storm clouds on the horizon, a reminder that their peace was borrowed time. Elias prepared quietly, training the ranch hands, stockpiling supplies, planning for the day the McGraws would rise again. She too prepared, teaching the girls to be brave, to listen, to run when told. She did not tell them of her fear, only of her love. And when the youngest asked one night, "Mama, will you always be here?" she answered without hesitation, "Always." The day would come when her promise would be tested, when the horizon would darken again with riders. But she no longer feared that moment, for she knew who she was now. She was not the woman who had once begged in rags. She was the woman Elias had chosen, the mother his girls had needed, the heart of a family forged in fire and love. And whatever the future held, she would face it not as a beggar, not as a shadow, but as the strength that held them together. The summer sun beat down hard on the plains, the sky a wide endless blue that seemed to stretch into forever. The ranch drummed with life, cattle moving in the distance, the creak of leather saddles, the laughter of the girls as they chased one another around the corral. She stood at the porch rail, wiping her brow with the back of her hand, the smell of bread cooling inside mingling with the sharp scent of dust and horse. Elias came in from the fields, his shirt damp with sweat, his stride slow but steady, his eyes cutting toward her the way they always did when he needed to remember why all of it mattered. For a time, the threat of the McGraws faded into the background. Neighbors spoke of them rarely, almost as though silence could make the gang vanish from the land. She wanted to believe it, wanted to hold on to the peace that seemed to be growing in the soil as surely as the wheat in their fields. The barn was rebuilt stronger, the fences repaired, the herd fattened. The girls grew sturdy, their cheeks flushed with sun and health. She would watch Elias working with them, teaching them to ride, to mend, to read the tracks of animals in the dirt, and her heart would ache with a fullness that felt almost too heavy to bear. Yet in the quiet of the nights, when the cicadas sang and the air grew cool, she felt the weight of unspoken truths. Elias had scars not just on his body but deep in his past, shadows that lingered in his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. She wanted to ask, wanted to pull those secrets from him so they could carry them together, but she knew some things were carved into a man's soul too deep to share. Still, each time he took her hand in the dark, each time he pressed his forehead against hers before sleep, she understood that what mattered was not the past but the future they were building, fragile though it might be. It was late August when the first sign came again. She had ridden out to the stream with the girls, their laughter ringing across the water as they splashed and chased minnows. She bent to fill a pail when she saw it, a set of boot prints in the soft earth, fresh and heavy. They weren't Elias's, nor any of the ranch hands. Her blood went cold. She hid her fear from the girls, leading them back quickly, telling them the sun was too hot and supper needed tending. That night, when Elias came in, she told him in a whisper while the girls played upstairs. His jaw tightened, and he left without a word, rifle in hand. He returned long after dark, his face grim, his clothes carrying the smell of smoke and dust. He did not tell her what he had seen, but she knew. They were being watched. The following weeks grew tense. Elias kept the girls closer to home, sent ranch hands to ride the outer fences daily. She carried a pistol tucked beneath her skirts when she worked in the yard, the weight of it both a comfort and a terror. At night, she dreamed of fire and gunshots, of men's voices shouting in the dark. She would wake trembling, Elias's arm pulling her tight against him, his heartbeat steady even when hers was racing. Then came the day of the fair in town. The girls had begged to go, their eyes shining at the thought of candy, ribbons, and music. Elias hesitated, but at last he agreed, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as if to draw strength from her calm. They hitched the wagon, dressed in their best clothes, and set out down the dusty road. The town was alive with color and sound, booths lining the street, fiddles playing, laughter ringing out. For a few precious hours, she allowed herself to forget the shadows. She watched the girls dance with ribbons, tasted sweet pies with Elias at her side, felt the warmth of being part of something larger than fear. But the illusion shattered, with a single glance. Across the street, beyond the milling crowd, she saw him, a man with a scar running down his cheek, his eyes fixed on them like a hawk circling prey. Her breath caught, her hand clutching Elias's arm. He turned, followed her gaze, and his whole body went taut. The man did not move, did not speak, but the promise in his stare was clear. The McGraws had not forgotten. They left the fair early, the girls protesting but silenced by the tension in their parents' faces. On the ride home, Elias's hand never strayed far from the rifle across his lap. She sat stiff beside him, the girls dozing in the back, the creak of the wagon wheels loud in the silence. When they reached the ranch, Elias spoke at last. "They're coming. It's only a matter of time." Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "Then we'll be ready." Readiness became their life. Elias drilled the hands daily, posted guards at night, checked and rechecked every rifle. She practiced too, learning to load and fire with steady hands, her aim improving until she could strike a bottle at 20 paces. The girls were kept close, their routines shortened, their laughter quieter. The ranch became a fortress, each day edged with the knowledge that violence hovered just beyond the horizon. The attack came not in the dark of night but in the blazing heat of afternoon. Dust rose on the southern trail, a cloud of riders, their shouts carrying on the wind. She was in the yard with the girls when she heard it. Elias's voice rang out sharp, commanding everyone into position. She grabbed the girls, shoving them toward the cellar, her heart pounding as gunfire erupted in the distance. The sound was deafening, sharp cracks splitting the air, the smell of powder already drifting on the breeze. She pressed the girls into the cellar, their eyes wide with terror. "Stay here, no matter what," she whispered, her voice fierce, her hands cupping their faces. "No matter what you hear, you stay." They clung to her, crying, but she pulled free, sealing the door before they could follow. Then she turned, pistol in hand, and ran toward the fight. The yard was chaos. Men on horseback stormed the fences, shots flying. Ranch hands fired from cover, the ground littered with dust and blood. She saw Elias near the gate, his rifle cracking again and again, his figure unyielding as stone. A man charged at him, but she raised her pistol, fired, and saw him fall. Her hands shook, her ears rang, but she did not falter. She was no longer the beggar hiding in shadows, she was a woman defending her home. The battle raged fierce, the McGraw gang relentless. Fire caught in the haystack, smoke billowing, men shouting. She reloaded clumsily, firing again, her breath coming hard. Then she saw him, the scarred man from town, his eyes locked on Elias, his gun raised. Without thinking, she ran forward, shouting Elias's name. The shot rang out, but Elias dropped to the ground, rolling, returning fire with deadly precision. The man fell, a scream tearing the air. At last, the gang broke, retreating into the dust, their dead left behind. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the moans of the wounded. She stood in the yard, smoke in her hair, blood on her hands, her body trembling with exhaustion. Elias came to her, his face streaked with grime, his eyes searching hers. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over her arms, her sides. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now, her strength crumbling. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could hardly breathe. The girls emerged from the cellar, their cries piercing the quiet. She fell to her knees, clutching them, kissing their faces, whispering over and over, "We're safe, we're safe." But she knew it was only half true. Safety was fleeting. The McGraws were not finished. This was only one battle in a war that would not end until every last one of them was gone. That night, as they buried the dead and tended the wounded, Elias stood at the edge of the yard, his face hard in the moonlight. She came to him, slipping her hand into his. He looked down at her, his eyes shadowed. "This won't stop until I finish it," he said quietly. Her heart twisted, fear gripping her, but she tightened her hold on his hand. "Then I'll finish it with you." He shook his head, his voice rough. "I won't put you in that danger." She lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You can't stop me. This is my home too. My family too. I won't stand by while you risk everything alone." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded, the faintest flicker of pride breaking through his grimness. "Then we ride together." And so it was decided. The fight was not over. It had only just begun. The morning after the attack dawned cold, though it was the middle of summer. The sky had a strange stillness to it, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Smoke still lingered faint in the air, the smell of burned hay and gunpowder clinging to the ranch like an omen. She stood on the porch with her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, her eyes watching Elias as he moved among the men. He was issuing orders, his voice firm, his stance strong, but she saw the heaviness in the line of his shoulders, the weariness etched into his face. He carried the burden not only of his family but of every soul on the ranch who had fought and bled the night before. The girls clung to her skirts, quieter than usual, their little eyes shadowed with fear they didn't know how to name. She knelt, smoothing their hair, whispering promises she prayed she could keep. "You're safe," she told them, though her voice shook. "Your papa and I will keep you safe." They nodded, but their arms tightened around her, their small bodies trembling. Children knew when promises were fragile, when danger lingered unseen. Later, when the girls were tucked upstairs, Elias came in from the yard, his boots heavy on the floorboards. She met him at the table, placing bread and stew before him though she knew he had little appetite. He sat, rubbing a hand across his face, his eyes haunted. She sat beside him, her fingers brushing his arm. "Tell me," she whispered. He stared at the bowl without eating, his jaw clenched. At last, he spoke. "They won't stop. The McGraws have scattered, but they'll regroup. As long as they breathe, this land, this family, will never be safe." Her heart pounded. She had known it, deep down, but hearing him speak it aloud made it real. "Then we can't just wait for them," she said softly. "We have to end it." His gaze lifted, sharp and searching. "You mean right after them?" She swallowed hard, but her voice did not waver. "Yes, hunt them before they hunt us. You said yourself this is our fight. Then we fight it until it's finished." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, slowly, Elias nodded. "You're right." Preparations began at once. Word was sent quietly to trusted neighbors, men who had fought alongside Elias before, men loyal not to law or coin but to the code of survival. Supplies were packed, rifles cleaned, horses ready. She trained harder, rising with the sun to practice until her hands blistered and her arms ached, until she could fire and reload with speed that surprised even Elias. He tried once to persuade her to stay behind with the girls, but she silenced him with a look that brooked no argument. "You said we face this together," she reminded him. "Don't you dare leave me behind now." He said nothing, only pulled her into his arms, his lips pressed fiercely against her hair. The night before they were to ride, she lay awake beside him, the girls asleep in the next room. Her mind spun with fear, with images of fire and death, but beneath it all was a steady flame of determination. She had come to this land broken, dressed in rags, begging for work. Now she was a wife, a mother, a fighter. She would not lose it. She would not lose them. At dawn, she kissed the girls goodbye, her tears soaking their hair. "Be good, my loves," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll come back to you." They clung to her, their cries tearing at her heart, but at last the ranch hand leading them away pried them gently free. Elias touched her shoulder, his eyes shadowed with the same pain. Together, they mounted their horses and rode out with the men, the sun rising behind them like fire on the horizon. The hunt was long and grueling. They tracked the gang through gullies and across rivers, following broken branches, boot prints, the faint smoke of campfires. Each day was a test of endurance, the sun merciless, the nights filled with howls of coyotes and the weight of fear pressing on every man's chest. But she did not falter. She rode hard, ate little, slept less, her mind fixed on the faces of her daughters waiting at home. Elias watched her with a mixture of pride and worry, his hand steadying her when her body shook from exhaustion, his presence a constant anchor in the storm. At last, after nearly 2 weeks, they found them. The McGraws had holed up in a canyon, their horses tethered, their campfire smoke rising against the cliffs. From the ridge above, Elias studied them, his eyes narrowing. There were fewer than they had expected. 10 men, maybe 11, but their weapons gleamed, and desperation made them dangerous. The men spoke in hushed tones, plans whispered, rifles loaded. She sat beside Elias, her heart pounding, her hands clenched around her reins. He turned to her, his face etched with gravity. "This will be hard," he said quietly. "Harder than anything yet, but if we finish it here, our girls will never have to live in fear again." She nodded, her voice steady. "Then let's finish it." The fight that followed was like nothing she had ever imagined. They descended on the camp at dawn, rifles cracking, shouts echoing against the canyon walls. The McGraws scrambled, firing wildly, their curses mingling with the screams of horses. She rode hard, her gun steady, her mind strangely calm. She saw a man raise his rifle toward Elias and without thinking, she fired, dropping him before the shot could fly. Adrenaline surged through her, burning away fear, leaving only fierce resolve. The battle raged brutal and close. Men fell, dust and blood choking the air. She found herself dragged from her horse by rough hands, her pistol knocked away. A McGraw loomed over her, his teeth bared, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. But before he could strike, Elias was there, his rifle swinging like a club, his roar echoing through the canyon. The man crumpled, and Elias pulled her to her feet, his eyes blazing with fury and fear. "I told you not to fall behind," he growled, his voice breaking. She managed a breathless laugh even as tears stung her eyes. "Then don't leave me behind." By mid-morning, it was over. The canyon floor was littered with bodies, the survivors of the gang fleeing into the wilderness, broken and beaten. Elias stood at the center, his chest heaving, his rifle lowered. She stumbled to him, her body trembling with exhaustion, and he caught her, holding her tight against him. Around them, the surviving men of their party gathered, their faces grim but relieved. It was done. The McGraws were finished. They buried the dead, marked the graves, and rode home. The journey back was slower, weariness pressing on every bone, but their hearts were lighter. For the first time in years, Elias's eyes held peace instead of constant vigilance. When the ranch came into view, the girls waiting on the porch, she nearly broke apart with relief. They ran to her, their little arms flung wide, their cries of "Mama," "Papa," carrying across the yard like music. She fell to her knees, clutching them, sobbing into their hair, Elias's hand resting firm on her shoulder. Life did not return to what it had been before. It grew deeper, stronger, richer. The scars of battle remained, in bodies and in memories, but they no longer lived beneath a shadow. The land was theirs, the future theirs to shape. She worked the ranch with Elias, raised the girls with love and discipline, taught them courage by the life she herself had lived. And at night, when the fire burned low and Elias's arms wrapped around her, she knew she had found the place where every wound in her soul had finally healed. Years later, when the girls were grown and the ranch thrived, neighbors would still tell the story of the woman who had come in rags, begging for work, and the rancher who had asked her not for labor but for love. They would speak of battles fought and storms endured, of how she became the mother the girls needed and the partner Elias had never expected to find again. But for her, the story was not in the telling. It was in the simple moments. The sound of laughter at the table, the warmth of Elias's hand in hers, the sight of her daughter strong and fearless, riding across the land they had fought to protect. She had once begged to survive. Now she lived, fully, fiercely, loved beyond measure. And in the wide, wild silence of the plains, beneath skies that stretched into forever, she knew she had not only found a home. She had built one. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.